I want to finish up our 6-3 lesson by giving an example of a kind of cool, simple paint program that we can use. It was written by the author, and you can see here that you can click different colors, and if I click and I drag, I can draw little things here. Hello. Um, Now, the textbook author actually used poor style in his, and so I had to refactor it. He did not do all his drawing inside Paint Component, and so one of the issues with that is, therefore, if I do this and I resize this, we would lose everything. So that was one of the issues. This way, everything is maintained. We'll talk about how to do that. I can click clear, and I can add things again. So this is where we're headed for. It's an application of clicking and dragging to produce a nice little paint program here. All right, so let's take a look at the refactored simple paint. I've already done some of the work already. So we can see here that this is an example of the first type of listener that I told you, where the component, the J panel, is itself a listener. So this was the most simple kind. It was kind of the easiest to work with in terms of you can access the variables without having to create getters and setters. But in terms of style, it's not so good, because if you ever wanted to change anything, there's no separation between the listener and the component. But we're just going to roll with it for time's sake. Also, it's a little bit clunky here, but we have a main program, a main routine inside this as well, just so we can get it all within one simple paint file. Okay, so I just want to give you a brief tour of the code, because I don't want to spend all day just looking at this code. But basically, coming down here, he has different numbers representing different colors. We have a couple of instance variables. And remember, these are used to represent the state of the program. So we're going to use this prev_x, prev_y as we are working to drag. And we also have a Boolean called dragging. I've left out a few things. Now, paint component. Again, this is what the system calls, takes in the graphics context, and it will be, again, the goal of this is to repaint everything from scratch. So, in other words, if I have this guy right here, let's see if I can find a way to, no, I guess not. But basically, if you look here, we get the width and height, and we're drawing 3 rectangles here. Basically, I set the color to gray. These are just, it's a 3-pixel wide border that he's drawing here by hand. Now, this is not the best way to do it. We'll learn about how to do borders on our own later, but he's doing it by hand. He's basically just drawing 3-pixel wide gray border. And then he is drawing, basically, this is all the different panels here. So these are not actual buttons. We will learn how to do buttons on our own later on, but he's basically just drawing rectangles. He's using fill rect with different colors here, and then he's putting a clear button here based off of the width. And so that's why even if I shrink it, I can get these, I can see all the colors here. And then we take a look at whatever the current color is, and so that's why I used it as a number. It's kind of a little trick here. Basically, the colors you can see here, red is 1, green is 2, blue is 3. So basically he multiplies by however wide this is. So the offset is like, you multiply by 1, whatever, I forget how many pixels, like 56, or 2 56s, or 3 56s, and this number tells you that. So I'm just kind of going through and helping you see that. You don't have to worry about it too much. Yeah, but then the key thing is this is happening with every single frame. It's redrawing everything. Again, this is claymation, sorry, it's animation, redrawing everything, not claymation where you just have to move the one thing that you are doing. All right, we'll come back to this. Change color just allows you to say, all right, hey, I have a way to, based off of this Y value here, to determine which color it would be, whether the new one's red, green, or whatever. All right, mouse pressed. So when I click on the mouse, when I press and then I start to hold, if you hear that screaming in the background, that's my son, by the way. He's fine. He's just doing his thing. If I press, notice how I'm grabbing the X and Y where I press. And if I was like, for example, like dragging, but then like I right-clicked and start dragging, I say I want to ignore that. Otherwise, I want to do some actual stuff here. We'll do some of that together, and then you'll take care of the rest. Mouse released resets our Boolean back to false. and then dragged is one of the big ones here. So in other words, how do I get this type of thing to happen? How do I get this as I drag? How do I get it to actually draw this nice figure here? Notice we're getting the X and Y. He has it clamping it, so if I go over to the edge, notice how it just kind of draws this right down the side here. So that's nice. And again, remember, we're not drawing, we're just updating our data structure. And then we have the rest of these guys down here. All right, so let's walk through some of these things. Let's plan out what we would need to do to get this done right. Again, I've got paint component is going to draw all these over and over again. Again, it's going to draw like the little gray border there. It's going to draw this every single time. It's 3 pixels long, and it's going to draw this thing here on the side based on the width, and it's going to draw all these different filled-in colors here, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so I'll be jumping back to this drawing in a second. Now, to do this better than the textbook is, I'm not going to provide the source code. You can look at it if you want, but it, again, does not follow good style. All the drawing needs to be done in paint component, and he does not do that, and he does not have everything saved in a data structure. In other words, it'll disappear as soon as we call paint component again. So what we want to do then is to first fix that problem of all the stuff disappearing. Actually, you know what? I decided to show you his code just so you can see the difference. So let me just run that. So this is actually the textbook author's code. And if I run this, let's watch it. It looks very similar. I can do all this stuff. If I draw, however, notice if I move this to call repaint, everything disappears. Right? Everything disappears as soon as I call paint component again. Let's briefly talk about why that is. This is the source code. First, notice that he has graphics context outside paint component, which is going to cause us trouble. So he does do some drawing inside paint component. This is paint component. But what we see here, and don't pay attention too much to this, is that inside change color, he actually gets the graphics, which you shouldn't do, sets the color, and then as he is drawing, let's see, where is it? As he is dragging, he is kind of creating a new context and drawing that line. So it's just kind of a bad thing overall. Again, a main weakness is in paint component, he has no data structure, so he's basically just drawing the outline here. See, that's the end. He's just kind of drawing the outline, all the colors. So all of these guys get drawn over and over again, but this is only kept as long as I don't call paint component again. As soon as I do, bam, gone. Okay, so that's the last I'll talk about that. So what we want to do is have some kind of data structure that will store all the information we need, not a rectangle array, right? Think to yourself, what type of thing would we want to store information that we would, like a drawing? So let me show you this here. So here's, let's say we've got, here's the blue, or let's say here, right? I click on blue. So let's say my current color is blue, and I press right here, right? So this is, let's say this is a coordinate 100, 50, and this is a press, right? So I press, right? Not a click, because a click would be release, but I press, and then I start to drag. Let's say right here, it catches up again. This is a little bit too simplified, but it catches up and it calls the mouse dragged, and by that time I'm already over here at 70, 70. And then I kind of shift, and it gets much more smooth than this because it's happening much more often. But let's say by now I'm at 50, 80, and so on and so forth. So it's actually much faster, so it looks more like a curve. But you can see what's happening here is what we probably want to do is save some kind of representation of this, right? So you could think of maybe as points, but I'm going to represent it as lines. So I'm going to represent it as a bunch of lines, because as long as I know the lines between these 2 points and then these 2 points and then whatever, I can recreate everything, right? Because what we should be doing is every time paint component is called, not only do I draw the border and the colors like he did, but I need to be creating the entire picture. And I can do that by saving all of these lines. Okay, so I think to myself, what do I need to save in the line? I need to save the coordinates of my x1, x2, y1, y2, and I need to save what color that was. That way, when I do paint component, I could go through and draw all the blues or all the reds, whatever. Okay, so that's what we're going to do first. We're going to create a new data structure. Let's just make it nested for convenience sake. So I'm going to make a private class called line. And again, what does a line need? It needs x1, x2, y1, y2, and a color. Private int x1, you can do commas, x2, y1, y2, and a private. Now, it's not a color because we're going to go by his implementation. Color probably better in the end, but he's using color codes, so I'll do color code. Okay, so every line will have those attributes. Let's go ahead and make a constructor, public, I guess you could probably do private, but whatever, int x1, actually, you know what, let's use Eclipse's. Let's use Eclipse's source, and instead of getters and setters, let's use generate constructor using fields. So I can generate the constructor using these fields, okay, and I, oops, had my cursor in the wrong spot, so let me just cut that and paste that in the right spot underneath. Okay, so I just saved myself a little bit of time. Again, that's source, generate constructor using fields. Okay, so now we have a way to store these guys, where we've named and defined a data type that will be stored, but we actually haven't created the data structure itself. So so we have lines, but remember, we're going to want to recreate all of them. So it's going to be not just one line, it could be a bunch of lines. So let's create a data structure. It could be a line array called lines, but just to make it a little bit more flexible, let's use an array list, even though we haven't formally studied those yet. An array list is, under the hood, it's just an array, but it'll dynamically resize itself. You have to pass in this weird looking thing, it's called a parameterized type, that will tell you what, it could be a string, could be an int, well, integer, but we're going to say like line like this, we'll call it lines, equals new, and again the syntax is kind of weird. You could just do an array if you want, but the nice thing about this is that it'll dynamically resize itself rather than us running out of space and having an overflow or index out of bounds. Okay, so we have this data structure now that can hold all of these guys. That means when I go back and I call paint component, it's called over and over again, I can just go back and go through this array list and paint all of these guys here. I can paint all the blue ones. I can paint this one over here, this line, and then this line. These are all just lines. So I'm just going to go through and paint them all. All right, so let's keep scrolling down here. All right, in the constructor. So remember, since the simple paint, it's a JPanel, but it's also a listener. Pause the video, see if you can register appropriately. Pause the video. How would you register appropriately? Okay, so hopefully you said, all right, the component is the JPanel, that's this. I want to add a mouse listener. Who is the listener? It's not separate, it's also this. Okay, now that's great, but if you forgot this one, remember we're also dragging, so it's not just a mouse listener, it's a mouse motion listener as well. And I've already defined those methods, so we don't have to add them, but don't forget both of those are necessary. Okay, paint component. Again, the system calls this. We can tell it to do paint component by calling repaint. This should do everything. So again, it draws the white, it draws the gray border, it draws all the different colors as not buttons, which we'll do later, but as just little rectangles. So what we want to do then is redraw. We want to redraw based off of the state of our data structure. So think to yourself, how would I do that? So again, if you can, try to pause and how would you redraw based on you have an array list of lines or an array of lines. What would you need to do? All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through the array list. It's going to have like, this is one of the elements, this is another element, this is another element. We're going to go through and we're going to have to draw a line. So we're going to use g.drawLine between these coordinates here. But we also can't forget about the color. So remember, G is a context, so we have to set the color first and then draw the line. Set the color and draw the line. And again, these could be stored in different orders. So what we need to do then is go through every single line that's stored. Right? So we're going to do a for loop. For int I equals 0. I is less than. Now for an array list, we don't say length. We say dot size. Okay? For an array list, we say size instead of length. And we'll do that in chapter 7 when we actually do array lists. Okay, so if we want to think, okay, based on the color code, each line has a color code. So I'm just going to do a switch statement just to make it easier to see. So I'm going to say switch because color code is just an int. So each line, again, if it was an array, I'd be like this, lines with the bracket I, but it's not, it's an array list. So again, it has a slightly different syntax. We say get I, so it's just the same version as the array, just with the brackets, and then color code. Now, even though that is private, because it's a nested class, I can just grab it without worrying. Okay, so I'm switching on the color code, whether it's black or red or whatever, 1 or 2 or 3, and we're going to do our cases. Okay, so let's do our cases again. If I do this in uppercase, again, we defined black and red, all these guys as just numbers, right? Black and red, these are all just numbers, so it's really just substituting the number in there. So if it's black, I want to set the context, set color to be color.black. Okay, and then don't forget for every switch, unless you do a break, it's going to just flow down and on the default might catch. So just get in the habit of putting that break in there. Let's just do, how many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'm just going to paste it, 7, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so if it's red, let's set it to red. If it's green, let's set it to green. If it's blue, let's set it to blue. If it's cyan, let's set it to cyan. And magenta, let's set it to magenta. And then finally, if it's yellow, let's set it to yellow. Okay, so we've set the colors, and then what we actually need to do then is we're going to have it draw this line. So instead of draw rect, remember G, the graphics context, has a bunch of things like draw rect, fill rect, but we also have draw line. Okay. Now, what line are we drawing? Remember, this is like an array. It's storing all these guys. So let's just look at this one. Let's say it's this one right here. I want to draw it between this x1 and this x2, so on and so forth. So again, if it was an array, I would say something like lines, because it's a for loop, dot x1, but it's not an array, it's an array list. So again, slightly different format. I say get element I, x1. So, and then get element i's y1. And then get element i's x2. And get element i's y2. Oops. Okay, so I'm drawing a line. So again, it makes sense to look at the big picture. This is running over and over again. Notice that this is going for every single line. Imagine there's like hundreds of lines, right? For each one of them, it's like, all right, switch the color, draw the line. Switch the color, draw the line. Switch the color, draw the line. It's going to, for all the different lines there, it's just doing this over and over again. Every single frame is going to do this, right? That's what the Java Paint components. All right, change color. Again, this just allows us to switch different colors. I'm not going to go into it. Let's go into the heart of the matter, which is our event handling methods. So again, when the mouse is pressed, I want to first start drawing. I have X and Y, the current one. If dragging is true, so this is good just for checking weird cases like if you're pressing two buttons again, I can return. So think to yourself then, we're not doing any drawing in here, but if the user clicks on the clear button, and this is just all the coordinate stuff, don't worry about that, but if they clicked on the clear button, what would you do? Okay. On the other hand, if they click on the color palette, so based on the coordinates, if they click on the color palette, so I know that they've clicked over here somewhere, I want to switch the color context based on the coordinate there. Okay, and then I want to update. So what would I do to update the highlighted square, not just the state internally, but so that I can see it like that. Let's go ahead and change that as well. And then finally, if the coordinates dictate that it's somewhere in this area, I actually want to draw those lines. So again, I'm not actually drawing, excuse me, but I'm setting the state. Again, this is not the drag method, excuse me, this is only the pressed method. So what I want to do is I want to set my previous x to be x, right? We're basically saying whatever the current, wherever I first click right there, that's my starting point. I think we called it start x for our last example, but we call this previous x because, well, you'll see. And then previous y is our y, right? So we're saying if when I first press right here, this is my previous x, and this is my previous y. Remember, you're going to need that oftentimes. You would need this by the time it calls the next drag, right? You're going to need that. And as I keep dragging, think about what has to change there. Okay, so I do that, and then I set dragging to be true. All right, mouse released. You can just take a look at that. It just sets the dragging back to be false. And then the main event, it's already mostly written for you, but you just have to do a little bit. So if I am not dragging, so if I'm kind of dragging it but not actually drawing, it won't actually do anything. Otherwise, I grab the current x and y. This is just the clamp down thing. All right, now what would we need to do here? What would we need to do here? How would I update my data structure to reflect the new state? Remember, I'm not actually drawing. Okay, I think that's it actually. So for your homework, or for your work, I'm not sure if it's classwork or homework since I'm recording this at home, but all these little triple star things you need to fill in to get it to work like the video shows. So good luck. One more thing for your homework. We chose to use an array list here, even though I haven't given you the syntax. Remember a few things for an array list. Lines.size gives you the size. I already gave that to you. Lines.get is kind of like, if it was an array, it'd be like this. This would be lines.length if it was a regular array. And then finally, if you want to add something, so like if you want to put like a new line here, blah. So that the array list version of that, we use this lines.add new line, blah 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 blah. Okay, so this will be used somewhere, right? How do you add to an array list? It's actually .add.